Hello, welcome. I'm so glad you guys are joining us today for a program this evening or whatever time it is, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule for this. We are excited to have a guest speaker today to talk about census records. We hope that you are excited as well. Tonight, we are joined here by our guest speaker, Lindsey Harner, who has her own business, and she'll be sharing a little information about that, Lindsey's Histories. But she's been conducting genealogy research since 2013. Her specialties include research in Pennsylvania and New York. She holds a BA in Speech and Communication Studies from Edinboro University of Pennsylvania and an MS in Media Management from Syracuse University. Historical preservation and unraveling genealogical mysteries are her passions. She began Lindsey's Histories in 2020 to help people with ancestors in Pennsylvania and upstate New York learn about and preserve their family history. So thank you, Lindsey, for joining us this evening, and I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Okay, is everybody seeing my screen okay?
Perfect.
Okay, great, thank you. Hello, everyone. Unfortunately, I'm having issues with my camera tonight, but hopefully you should all be able to see my PowerPoint and hear me okay. Thank you all so much for joining me tonight, and thank you so much to the Allen County Public Library for asking me to speak tonight. This topic is one of my personal favorite genealogy related topics to talk about, and that is, of course, census records. I'm sure many of you have had the experience where you may log into a site like Ancestry, for example, and you search for an ancestor and you find a profile that seems to match them, and you click to see all of the records that are attached to that person. And sometimes you may notice a gap, or maybe even two, with the census records attached to that person. And it's easy to assume that, well, if all of these other people out there who are researching this person haven't been able to find these census records, must be they don't exist. Either maybe the records were destroyed, or, must be they just weren't counted. The census taker must have missed them. And yes, sometimes that certainly is possible. Sometimes that probably is the case. But there are other times where these census records are out there somewhere. Some of them just take a little more effort to find. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm going to share some tips and some search strategies to try to help you find those elusive records. But first, I'm going to share a brief overview of the U.S. federal census. And then I'm going to share some reasons why it's really important to try to find every census record you can when you're researching an ancestor. And I'm also going to share some of the reasons why you may be having trouble finding a particular record. Then I'm going to share my tips and search strategies that can help you uncover these hidden records. And lastly, for those situations when you still cannot find those records, I'll share some ideas for some census substitutes that you can still use. Okay, so let's start with some history about the census. So Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution requires that a census be taken every 10 years. And specifically what the Constitution says is representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union according to their respective numbers. So in other words, the census uh, needed to be taken for taxation purposes and in order to calculate each state's representation in Congress. For example, here in Pennsylvania, where I live, we have 17 congressional districts, and that number is calculated based on the numbers that come out of the census every 10 years. Our numbers actually decreased the last 3 censuses because our population is not growing as fast as other states. So the first census was taken in 1790. The Constitution was written in 1787, and it specified that the first census needed to be taken within 3 years. So that first census was taken in 1790, and the most recent was taken just 3 years ago in 2020. And the information in the census is not released publicly for 72 years. And that's for privacy reasons because the census does contain quite a bit of personal information. So just last year, the 1950 census became available, and we'll have to wait another 9 years for the next census release for the 1960 census to come out in 2032. So the first few censuses from 1790 to 1840 only named the heads of household. Everyone else was only counted. Now, in each census was a little different, but usually free white people were grouped by their age and gender, and there were additional columns for labeled other free people and slaves. Now, if you ever hear the term the 1850 brick wall in genealogy, it's referring to the census because it's much more difficult to piece together an entire family prior to 1850 when only one person in the household is listed by name in these records. However, in 1850, that changes. And this is the first census to list all free people by name. Slaves continued to be tallied on slave schedules in the slave states in 1850 and 1860. The 1880 census was significant because for the first time, the census identified the relationships to the head of the household. And this is important because before this, really relationships can only be assumed by the census. But for the first time in 1880, it specifically says how everyone is related to the head of the household. That census also lists everyone's parents' birthplaces for the first time. And this is extremely helpful because this can offer additional clues if you're struggling to identify an ancestor's parents. Unfortunately, most of the 1890 census was destroyed by fire in 1921, but a special census of the Union veterans and their widows does survive. And this is very helpful if you had any ancestors who served in the Union Army during the Civil War. The 1900 census is really unique because for the first and only time, really, the month and the year of birth for each person was recorded. Every other census only gives everyone's age, but this one identifies their month and year of birth. Not always accurate, like much of the information in the census, but still it can be very helpful, and that's a great resource. The 1900 census also records the year of immigration for anyone born outside of the United States. The 1940 census is really interesting because it includes a lot of occupational data, information like the number of hours worked each week, a person's annual income, So 1940, the country was at the tail end of the Depression. And obviously during the Depression with the New Deal, a lot of government programs were implemented to try to address the unemployment rate. So I think the 1940 census was used to sort of gauge the effectiveness of a lot of these government programs. A note about Native Americans in the census. Native Americans were mostly excluded from the census until 1880 because they were not taxed. In 1880, a special census was taken of Native Americans living in Washington Territory, Dakota Territory, and California. The 1890 census was the first census attempting to count all Native Americans living in the United States. Now, some people may wonder, is it really that big of a deal if I can't find every single census record for my ancestor? If I can find most of them, is it really worth the extra effort if I'm only missing one, maybe two census records? I would definitely argue that yes, it is worth the extra effort. There's so many things that census records can tell us about our ancestors. One of the great things about them is they just give us so many details about our ancestors' lives. They can really help to give you a fuller picture of who your ancestor was and their life. And this is especially helpful with especially those ancestors who did not leave behind a lot of records. The census records, they can place a family in a specific time and place so that you know where to look for additional records for them. They help to establish relationships between people, not only family members within a household, but also relationships between neighbors, which can be very helpful with using cluster research and trying to break down brick walls that way. A census can reveal children that you never knew about. If a child died very young, and one census record may be the only surviving record of that child. Census records can also help to break down brick walls in your research. Questions like, who were my third great-grandmother's parents? Who was the mysterious and much younger third wife of my great-great-grandfather? What happened to my ancestor who disappeared? These are some of the burning questions in my research that census records have helped me to answer. And tonight I'm going to show you how I found each of the records that helped me answer these questions. But first, what are some of the reasons why we sometimes have trouble finding an ancestor in the census? And there's many possibilities. It certainly is possible that they weren't counted for some reason. Maybe they were missed by the census taker. It also could be possible that they were in the census, but the record no longer survives. It's always important when researching in any record collection to try to educate yourself about that particular record collection. So for example, if you're on Ancestry and you're in the record collection, it's always a good idea to scroll down to the bottom of the page to that About section and to read that because that should tell you if there's any part of the record collection that is missing or hasn't been added yet. Because there are some very early census records that are missing for certain states. So you'll want to be aware of that as well. They could be difficult to find because our ancestor's name is spelled in a way that we weren't expecting. Anyone who's been researching a while knows that um, pretty much any name can be spelled a variety of ways in different records. And sometimes it's hard to know how it's going to be spelled. It's also possible that the census taker made an error while they were collecting information, or they were given incorrect information. So in the 1940 census, there was supposed to be an X marked next to the name of the person who supplied the information. But before that, we really have no way of knowing who the informant was for a particular census record. So it's even possible that if the census taker came to a house and no one was home, maybe they even got that information from a neighbor, and maybe that neighbor didn't know all of the children's names, or they didn't know where someone was born, or they didn't exactly know someone's age. So that can make it difficult to find the records when the information isn't quite as accurate as we would expect it to be. It's also possible that the handwriting is difficult to read, and this can lead to an error in transcription. Okay, so let's get to the tips and the search strategies for locating these hard to find census records. Tip number 1, focus your search to one record collection. So it's not a good idea to do a general record search for your ancestor when you're just trying to find them in one specific census. So you only want to search that census that you're looking for. So for example, if you're trying to find someone in the 1870 census, just search that census. And there's 2 really good reasons why you want to focus your search this way. First, it's going to help limit the number of search results that are returned to you. It's going to give you a more manageable number to look through. Second of all, some websites like Ancestry, they allow you to customize your search of a record collection by opening up search fields that match that specific record collection. So for example, if you're searching just the 1880 census on Ancestry, you're going to have search fields like occupation and marital status that you wouldn't have when doing a general search. And it's really important to have these customized search fields available to utilize some of these other strategies that I'm going to be talking about later on. And the way that you do this is by using the card catalog on the website that you're using. So you go to the card catalog on the site, you search for 1860 census, for example, find that record collection, and you select it. Tip number 2, use wildcards in your search. Like I just mentioned a couple minutes ago, many of our ancestors had last names that were spelled a variety of ways, and wildcards are a great way to capture all of these spelling variations in our searches. So there's 2 different wildcards that are recognized by a lot of different websites, not even necessarily just genealogy websites, but the search functions on a lot of websites recognize these wildcards. And that is the question mark and the asterisk. So a question mark can be used to replace just one letter. So for example, if you're searching the surname Higgins, this can be searched HIGG question mark NS. Because that name quite often ends INS, ENS, ANS. So searching for it this way will capture all of those spelling variations. And you can use the question mark more than once in a search as well. So another example, the surname Casper. It can start with a K, it can start with a C, it can end in ER, it can end in AR. So searching question mark ASP question mark R is again, you'll get all of those different spelling variations in your search results. The other wild card is the asterisk. Now this can be used to replace a string of letters. So the last name Lorridge, and this is a name that's going to come up a lot tonight in this presentation because that's a name that no one can spell. But Lorridge can be searched LO asterisk or L asterisk RIDGE. Typically, the asterisk is put at the end of the search term, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So for example, if I were to search L asterisk RIDGE, that would capture Lorridge, Lockridge, Laffridge, Loveridge. And you can also use these wildcards together in one search. Both the question mark and the asterisk can be used at the same time. So one really good example of this is when I was searching for my Breckenridge ancestors in the 1850 census. That's another name that was very difficult to find. Sometimes it was Breckenridge, other times it was Brackenridge. The end of the name varied greatly as well. So when I was trying to find them, this is what I entered in the search field. I entered the name of the head of the household, James, and then for the surname, I searched BR question mark CK asterisk. And then I also entered the name of the county where they lived, and I searched surrounding counties. And I received, searching this way gave me 18 search results. And he turned out to be the first search result that I received. His name was entered as James Brackenbig, which was why I was having so much trouble finding him. So there's a lot of different combinations you can try with these wildcards. So get creative, and if you don't find what you're looking for the first time, be persistent and keep trying. It may take several attempts and some experimentation with which wildcard to use and where to place it in the name, but they can be extremely helpful when you're not totally sure how an ancestor's name might be spelled in a record. Tip number 3, only search for first names. This is another strategy that has helped me in numerous situations. It's most helpful when you're searching for a large family. It also works better on Ancestry than it does on Family Search because Family Search limits the other people that you can search for to just 2 entries. But it works really well on Ancestry because there you have the capability to search for a lot more people at one time. So this strategy I used to find my Morgan family ancestors in the 1870 census. So what I did to find them in 1870 was I looked at their census record in 1860 and again in 1880. I made a list of all of the children who should have been alive at the time of the 1870 census. And in the top search field, I entered James, who was the head of the household. I included his approximate year of birth, and I also included the name of the county where they lived in search for the surrounding counties. And then scrolling down in the spouse field, I entered his wife's name, Catherine. And then in the child field, I listed each of their children from oldest to youngest. and clicking child, which you see circled at the top of the screen. By clicking that repeatedly, that opened up additional fields for children to enter their names in. Searching this way returned a very high number of search results. You can see 4,899 results, but it really didn't matter that I got a lot of search results because they were the very first. Result. The reason I was having trouble finding them was because of the Morgan family was they were entered as the Morton family. This strategy also helped me find my Romaine ancestors and their 4 children in 1850. They had mistakenly been entered as the Vermain family. Okay, so the last couple tips that I shared, they had more to do with issues with the surname, but oftentimes there can also be issues with the given name, or it can be a combination of the given name and the surname. So the next few tips I'm going to share can help overcome some of the issues with the first name. So tip number 4 is to search for a household member with a common first name. So that's because a common first name is much less likely to be misspelled or transcribed incorrectly. So one example of this is when I was trying to find my great-grandfather, Arland Lorridge, in the 1920 census. So I had tried searching both his full name, Arland, his nickname, Arlie. I was using a wild card in his last name, but I was not having any luck. I kept coming up empty-handed. Finally, I thought, well, I wonder what happens when I try searching for his wife, Myrtle. So searching for Myrtle, L-O asterisk, gave me this result. If I had continued trying to search for my great-grandfather, Arlie, I may never have found him because Arlie Lorridge was entered Orly Loveridge. However, Myrtle's name was spelled exactly like I expected it to be. The next tip, try searching for abbreviated first names. Common first names were often abbreviated in the census. Some examples include WM for William, JAS for James. And unless another user on that website has found this record and attached a note to it, those abbreviations may not necessarily appear in search results when the full name is entered in the search field. And I included a link on this slide. It should also be in your handout. This link will take you to a list of abbreviations for English given names. Tip number 6, search for nicknames. Women especially often would go by nicknames, and sometimes these nicknames were not necessarily derivative of their given names. One example is Polly. Polly was a very common nickname. I have 2 different female ancestors whose given name was Mary, but they were both nicknamed Polly, and they appear in census records sometimes as Polly. Now, if you're wondering how in the world do you find these not so obvious nicknames, Family Tree magazine has a really helpful female nickname searchable guide. And again, the link is on this slide, and it's also in your handout. Tip number 7, search for the middle name or initials in place of a first name if your ancestor had a middle name. And here's just a few examples to show. The first one is my ancestor, Charles Henry Ball. He quite frequently appeared in records by his middle name, Henry Ball. The second one is, again, it's the Lorridge surname. But this time, the issue was with the first name. When I was trying to find my ancestor, James Lorridge, he was a veteran of the Union Army, and I was having trouble finding him in the 1890 veteran census. And finally, it occurred to me that in his military records, for some reason, he was referred to by his middle name, Horace. So I finally searched for his middle name in place of his first name, and I found him right away. The example on the bottom is my great-grandfather, Ransford Eli Carson, in the 1920 census, where he appears as R.E. Carson. Tip number 8, search for the people closest to your ancestor. So this could include their parents, their siblings, their spouse, their in-laws, their children. And when you find these people that are closest to them, look closely at the other members of their household and their nearest neighbors. Could any of these people be your ancestor that you're looking for? So when I was having trouble finding my widowed third great grandmother in 1920, her name was Lucy Kennedy. I couldn't find Lucy Kennedy anywhere, but Lucy Kennedy was in the household of her daughter. Okay, tip number 9. Think like a detective and use profiling in your search. So oftentimes in genealogy, we're trying to solve a mystery. And detectives, when trying to solve a crime, sometimes use profiling in their investigation. And we can use a similar tactic in genealogy research. And the way that you do this is you create a profile of your ancestor using the facts that you know about them that would be included in a census record. And instead of searching for someone with your ancestor's name, you search for someone who fits that profile. So the best time to use this strategy is when you're pretty confident about where your ancestor lived at the time, and when they had some sort of unique characteristic that would be recorded in the census. Maybe this is an unusual occupation. Maybe they were born in another state or another country. Maybe one of their parents had an unusual birthplace. So here's a couple examples I'll share with you. Again, here's the Lorridge surname. When I was having trouble finding James Lorridge in 1910, I only searched for 3 facts about him. I left the name fields blank, and I just searched for his approximate birth year, which was 1845. I knew he lived in Elmira, New York at the time, so I searched in the county. And then I also knew that he worked as a barber for much of his career. So I entered barber in the occupation field and clicked the exact checkbox next to this field. And I only received 2 results. And the first one, James Lengthy, matched him exactly, except for the misspelled surname. And this is a situation where I also could have found him by using a wild card or by not searching for his last name, but it was actually a lot easier and quicker to not even search for a name at all, just to search for those 3 facts. Okay, and here's another example that's a little more complicated. So I had discovered a newspaper item about my great-great-grandfather marrying for a 3rd time in 1933. He was 77 at the time, and his wife was 29, and her name was Eugenia McMurray. And of course, I wanted to learn a little bit more about her, but doing a record search for Eugenia McMurray was not getting me any results. So using the information in the newspaper item, I was able to obtain their marriage record from the Historical Society in the county where they were married. Between the newspaper item and the marriage record, I learned that she was born approximately in 1904 because she was 29 in 1933. I learned that she was born in Minnesota. She lived in Seattle, Washington at the time that they were married. She was a white female, and that she had been divorced in 1929. And so I just did a search for someone who met all of these criteria. And again, I clicked the exact checkbox next to the marital status field where I entered divorced. And it came back with 31 search results, which isn't terrible. That's a manageable number to search through. And just scrolling down through the list of names, I did not find Eugenia McMurray, but I did find Jean McMurray. And fortunately, in this record, she was living with her parents at the time. And this was helpful because Eugenia McMurray's name changed quite frequently in different records. But since I was able to link her to her parents in the 1930 census, I was able to trace her back through previous census records. And so I learned that Eugenia McMurray was most likely born Ella May Mead. Okay, tip number 10, don't limit your search results too much. So if you've tried everything else, you may want to try leaving some more search fields blank, or at least expanding some of your search parameters if you're able to. Sometimes your ancestors just may not be where you expect them to be, or maybe they're exactly where you expect them to be, but because of a boundary change, they're now in a different town or a different county. Maybe their age is just wildly inaccurate in the census. So try to keep an open mind and consider numerous possibilities. So I'm going to share just one more example with you. So my grandmother, she had often, she would sometimes mention her great-grandfather named Jacob Link. And she would refer to him as the missing link because according to family legend, he went out west to seek his fortune and was never heard from again. Naturally, I wanted to solve the mystery of what had happened to Jacob Link, but I had no idea where he ended up or when he died. I initially assumed if he went out west, maybe he went out all the way to the West Coast to California or Oregon, but I really didn't know. So I did a search of the 1880 census for what I did know about him, which wasn't much, but obviously I knew his name. I knew his approximate birth year, that he was born sometime in the mid 1820s, and also that he was born in Pennsylvania. The name Jacob Link was actually a pretty common name, but fortunately, he was the only one I could find born about that time in Pennsylvania. Most other men with that name and about his age were born in Germany or another state. So his approximate birth year and birthplace were distinguishing characteristics that I searched for. And I only got a few search results, and one of them seemed to match him perfectly. And this person was in Wisconsin. And then once I found the census record, I was able to find a marriage record in the same county. That marriage record listed his father as Michael Link, which was also my ancestor's father's name, which made me more confident that I had found the right person. And Wisconsin was a state that I never would have thought to check for him, but I was able to find him there by leaving the residence field blank and doing a nationwide search, just using those few facts that I did know about him. And just one last general piece of advice, persistence is key. Try multiple strategies. If one doesn't work, try another one. Try a combination of some of these strategies. Try different websites. If you're not having luck on Family Search, try Ancestry or vice versa. If you're pretty confident about where your ancestor was in the census, you can even try manually searching the census page by page. Most of these examples that I shared with you tonight, I only found after numerous failed attempts. So be persistent and don't give up too easily. Okay, so now in those situations where you're not able to find the record for whatever reason, if the record has been destroyed or you still cannot find your ancestor, even after trying a bunch of different tactics, there are a number of census substitutes you can turn to. You can check for state or territorial census records. Most states at one point did do a state census. Now, whether or not the record still exists and what you will find in that record, that's going to vary a lot by the time and the location. Pennsylvania, where I live, is one of the few states that unfortunately has never done a state census. However, New York, on the other hand, has done many state censuses in its history, and they did one in 1892. So that's a really great substitute for the missing 1890 census. So if the records aren't, some of these state census records are available online. If you can't find them online, you can check state archives, state libraries, or state historical societies. I did include a link on your handout that will take you to a web page that will list every U.S. state and territorial census that has been taken. There's also city or county directories that you can use. These will only list the head of the household. Ancestry has a pretty good database that I believe goes back to the 1820s. So that's a good place to check. But if you can't find what you're looking for on Ancestry, or you don't use Ancestry, the County Historical Society where you're researching is also a good place to check for directories. they may have a physical copy that hasn't been digitized that they could check for you. And tax lists are also a good census substitute. One of the great things about tax lists is that unlike the census that was only done every 10 years, tax lists were created every year. Now, they may only list males over the age of 21 who owned property, and not all the records survive, but they can still be a good source for placing a family in a certain particular location at a certain time. And places to check for tax lists include county archives and historical society. So really quick, I just want to recap what I've discussed tonight. So the U.S. federal census began back in 1790 for the purposes of taxation and for determining states' representation in Congress. The census has been taken every 10 years from 1790 until the most recent one in 2020, and the 1950 census is the most recent census that has been made publicly available. Census records can be difficult to find for many reasons, such as record loss, variations in name spellings, errors in the gathering of the information, transcription errors. But fortunately, some of these challenges can be overcome by using different search strategies. Some of these strategies include focusing your search to one record collection, using a combination of wildcards, eliminating the surname from your search, searching only for people with common first names, searching for abbreviations or nicknames. When a person has a middle name, searching for their middle name or their initials. Using cluster research by searching for your ancestors' closest relatives. Using profiling instead of names in your search. And by keeping your options open. And when these census records still cannot be found, even after all of our best efforts, records like state or territorial census records, city or county directories, or tax lists can sometimes serve as helpful substitutes for the federal census. So that is all I have. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join me tonight. Again, thank you to the Allen County Public Library. And I'd like to open it up to some questions if anyone has any questions on anything that I covered tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was such a wonderful presentation. And honestly, the chat has been blowing up. There's been a lot of great suggestions in the chat. So guys, if you want a copy of the chat, please email us, genealogy@acpl.info. I will put that in the chat again. So make sure to shoot us an email. But hey, Lindsey, we have a lot of great questions here. So let's get started.
Okay.
Someone wanted to know, they haven't found relatives in the 1920 census for Raleigh, North Carolina. How can they determine if they were skipped? They lived in a new subdivision at the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and I'll admit I don't have any experience with North Carolina particularly. I'm not aware of those census records being destroyed in 1920. But the first thing I would do is, just check the about section of the record collection on the website, just to make sure that, records do exist for that time period. Second of all, if you're pretty confident about where they are located, I don't think anybody likes to hear this, but the best thing to do may be to go page by page and look, just go page by page, line by line. It can be time consuming, but yeah, that may be And if you can't find them then yes, they might have been skipped, unfortunately.
Thank you. I think you have the best piece of advice there. So just go through it line by line. Let's see here. In 1950, my family had 4 members, mother, father, sister, and me. I found my family in the 1950 census, but my mother is not listed with the family, although we all live together. What strategies can I use to find her?
Hmm. Yeah, I came across a similar situation with my grandfather not being listed in his family when he was a child. Um, and I mean, if she lived with you, my guess would be she might not be there. But to continue searching for her, um, I mean, it would be helpful to well, like I said, probably the last tip might be applicable to this. Keep your options open. Maybe was she traveling at the time? Maybe you know, it's hard to know what the situation is, but keep your options open, like the location. And again, it's hard to know without knowing what her name was. If she had an extremely common name like Sarah Smith or Sarah Miller, that might not be very helpful. But another thing to keep in mind is just use everything that you know about your mother uh, to search for her. And maybe that might be a good situation to use profiling to search for someone who fits your mother's profile. But that's the great thing about the census is that it records so many details. So I would just utilize everything that you know about her to try to search for her.
I like the suggestion as well in the chat. Someone said a missing mother might have been hospitalized, such as in a TB sanatorium.
Yes, that's a great suggestion. I've actually just been looking into accessing state hospital records. So yeah, usually state hospital records are available from state archives. So that might be one place to check.
Awesome. Thank you. Someone's wondering how to access the 1890 Union Special Census.
Mm-hmm. It's available on Ancestry Family Search.
Thank you. Actually, there were 2 questions on that. Um, so someone missed what you had said about the census information supplier marked with an X. Could you run through that again very quickly?
Yeah, sure. So that was about the 1940 census. Starting in the 1940 census, the census taker was supposed to put an X next to the name of the person that supplied the information. So in that record collection, anyway, we do know who the informant was. Unfortunately, before that, we really have no way of knowing. Um, they didn't need to record who gave them the information. That wasn't included in their instructions.
Thank you. Someone's asking, was there any requirement to enumerate people who were institutionalized, prison, orphanages, poor farms, etc.? If so, is there a general rule of where in a given census this type of record would appear? For example, normal position by address, end of section, end of the county list, etc.
Mm-hmm. Um, so I know in the 1880 census, they sort of did a special supplemental census with um, with people who were institutionalized. Um, but I, as far as I'm aware, they are typically part of the census. You now don't quote me on this. I'm not an expert on this. But the I would have to look more into that, but I know in the 1880 census in particular, they had a supplemental schedule. I mean, it would help to know what time period in particular they're asking about. Um, the like if they're referring to a county home, there are also quite often county home records that you can access with information about people being discharged or people being admitted and when they were discharged. If you can't find them in the census, that might be another resource to check.
Yeah, and I'm gonna also throw in the census instructions for the enumerators into the chat.
Yeah.
It might have something in there as well. Who knows?
Yes, and I believe the enumerator's instructions are usually included in the if you read the about section for a record collection, it should tell you what the enumerators were told to do. So again, that's always a good thing to do. Read the about section, try to find out the enumerator's instructions. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Are there non-subscription based census records that can be used?
Um, I'm guessing, are they talking about non-subscription sites?
Yeah, I'm
Because
guessing they're not wanting to use like Ancestry or Find My Past or My Heritage.
yeah, yeah. If you're, if you're looking for a way to access the records, without paying a subscription fee, a family search, um, is a great option. That's free. Now you still need to have an account to access the records, but even Ancestry, if you go to your local library, you can check to see if they have Ancestry Library Edition. Um, Quite often, you may need to be a library card holder, but many libraries have Ancestry Library, and they still offer, as far as I'm aware, they typically offer, all of the features that you would get with a subscription, except that you can't build a tree on there. You can't access the DNA portion of the website. But yes, Family Search and Ancestry Library are two free resources you can access census records with.
Thank you. Um, so someone says that they've searched the entire enumeration district for the 1940 census, but their great-grandparents' apartment building in Chicago was skipped altogether. Other than using city directories, are there any other resources to try?
Yeah, in that situation, that sounds like a situation where they were missed by the census taker, unfortunately. Um, I'm not sure about the availability of, let's see, 1940. So we're talking, that's more than 80 years. I'm not sure how long um, it takes before tax records can be made publicly available, but that might be an option. Um, Also, I mean, there's also always newspapers to search for any information. Newspapers are one of my favorite things to search because you never know what you might find in a newspaper. Also, maybe church directories. That might be another thing to try.
Awesome. Thank you. Those are great suggestions. Um, and there's one in the chat, voter registration records. So that's good.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So someone has a question about when searching a name, how important are apostrophes such as O'Neill versus O'Neill without one, or spaces, such as with the name Mackenzie? If it makes a difference, do you add a question mark?
Hmm. That's a really good question because I cannot think of an instance in my research where I've searched for somebody with an apostrophe in their name. But in that situation, I would try both ways, with the apostrophe, without. Um, and that also sounds like a good scenario for using wild cards. I mean, any surname starting with O, I wouldn't think is terribly common. So maybe even just searching O asterisk might be helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. we're getting close to time, so I'm going to go ahead and just do another question. So guys, I know there's been a lot of great questions here tonight, and thank you so much for coming, participating, talking in the chat and whatnot. But we'll get one last question in. So we'll go to that. But if you have more, Lindsey has graciously offered her email address in the handout. You can, and on the screen. So make sure to contact her with other questions, any future questions. And also, if you have questions for us, please reach out. We want your search to be successful. So we'll continuously put our email address in as well. Kurt just threw it in there. So the last question tonight is, if I'm searching an older census in which the street name is not noted on the page, what tool can I use to determine the streets using wards and districts? I'm aware of Steve Morris's site, but the large cities street finder there doesn't include Pennsylvania in the list of available states. I'm trying to determine streets for some ancestors in Philadelphia in the 1870 census.
So my first recommendation would be to look at city directories for that time period. If that's not an option, there may also be like insurance maps, like the Sanborn insurance maps. Yeah, that may be another resource. And now it's hard to know if they living in the city, were they in a house or an apartment building? If they were in an apartment building and renting, they probably wouldn't be in a map. But yeah, those would be my top two options: city directories or some type of property map or insurance map.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and put the Sanborn maps in the chat really quick. And there we go. So thank you so much, Lindsey, for joining us this evening. And I like that you were able to put up that last slide. So we have A, we can see what you look like, and B, you have your business up here as well.
Yes, thank you. Yes, this has my website address on here, my email address, also the social channels I'm on. Yeah, feel free to contact me with any questions. Also on my website, I have a blog, which please check that out as well. And I am based in central Pennsylvania. So I research for clients here in central Pennsylvania. So if any of you have ancestors in Pennsylvania and you need a record pulled from a county courthouse or historical society, that's what I specialize in. So please feel free to reach out to me. You can contact me either of these ways, through my website or send me an email. Also, if any of you try any of these strategies that we talked about tonight and have had some success, I would love to hear some success stories if you have any of those to share with me as well. But yes, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Allison.
Of course. Thank you so much, Lindsey, for a wonderful presentation. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening, or whatever time it is where you are. And hopefully we'll see you again at our next program on Tuesday at 2:30 Eastern Time. So thank you everyone, and have a good rest of your day or evening. Bye.